Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Harry Lauseniziris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. We are continuing the coverage of the online grecochess tournament that is taking place in the platform of chess.com. Today we have one more game to show to you, the final game of group number 4 that decided who is going to advance the finals. But let me share my screen with you first. And here we are. With the white colors is Scrapido, with the black colors is my skin. The situation is as following in group number 4. Two out of the 4 players did not take it seriously. They either timed out or resigned early. So it's going to be between Scrapido and my skin. In the first game that they played, my skin with the white colors won, and so if he has at least a draw, he's advancing along the final round. If Scrapido wins, then both of them advance. But let's see what actually happened in the game. Scrapido starts with e4, d5 for black. For my skin, this is the so-called Scandinavian defense. In the notes, I see that it was first ever recorded in 1475. White takes a black pawn in d5, and black, instead of using the queen to take on d5, they use the knight, send it to f6 to attack the pawn. Why? Because if the queen goes to d5, then the knight can go to c3, and the queen has to go away, so why waste a second move? One may wonder what would happen if white would send the pawn to c4 and protect the pawn at d5. Well, it seemed promising, but eventually if black plays correctly, black will be ahead. But let's see how white will continue. White sends the pawn to d4, another book move. Black uses the knight to take the pawn on d5. We're still in book move, but this is going to be the end because the next move for white is an inaccuracy. Knight goes to e2. The green arrow shows the best move according to the computer. And also you can see on the left the advantages that before the move, white can advance of 0.7 or 0.75, and mostly because it started with white, and now it goes down to 0.2. Black sends the bishop on f5. This is the best move. You see the star means a move is the best. If there is a thumbs up, it means it's an excellent move. And there are various other ways to show. As I showed before, the exclamation, this orange with the question mark and exclamation means inaccuracy. This is the best move. This is a good move. The checkpoint here is a book move, while is a good move, while the best would have been the pawn to go to a3 for white. And you see now black has an advantage of 0.1. Black still plays the best moves, has increased the advantage 0.2, but now black has an inaccuracy with the knight on c6 instead of sending the pawn to h5, and so now white has a small advantage of 0.5. Why pawn to h6? To avoid bishop go to g5 and attacking the queen. But white makes a mistake. The exclamation mark, this orange without the question mark with the orange without exclamation is a mistake. Now black has an advantage of 1.7. Why? Because they open the diagonal to go from h4 to e1. Of course, currently queen cannot take here because the rook would take it, but if bishop would go here, then there'd be a good possibility, and white could only defend with sending the pawn to g3 and thus opening the king even more. But instead of sending the bishop to e7, black sends it to d6. White should have kicked out the bishop with the pawn to g4, since the computer So at least they only have to worry about the darker bishop, but does not. And instead they send the knight to d2, and by doing so they also block the bishop on c1. And that's why black has an advantage of 2.9. And black takes full advantage. Bishop goes to, excuse me, knight goes to e3. Great move. This exclamation mark means great move. You see that the white queen is in trouble, has very few squares to go, only b3 and a4. It's going to be safe. Otherwise, it will be taken by the knight. And even there, goes to b3, the best move. You see the star. But even there, black has still advantage of 2.9. And black is going to win a rook with the knight on c2. Why? Because it's a check. There are three legal moves for white. One of them, we forget it. Queen takes the knight on c2 and then loses the queen for the bishop. The other one is king goes either to d1 or f2, but then they lose a rook at h1. King goes to f2, and black wins the rook on a1. Black is a rook ahead and 2.9 according to the computer. But the big question is, can the black knight escape safely? Because if it's lost, then black's still ahead, but only by an exchange. Let's see. Queen goes to d1, hoping the queen was attacked, by the way, from the knight. I had to go somewhere, but ideally it should have gone to b7 because that is where it can attack the knight on c6. First you get the pawn, then you attack the knight on c6, and you are back in the game. But now black is ahead by 3.7. Now it goes to e7 now for black, attacking the pawn on h4. Knight goes to c4 for white. And yes, black takes the pawn and checks from h4. The rook cannot take it because the queen takes the rook. Black, white defends by sending the pawn to g3. Bishop back to f6. Knight to a3. The idea being that the black knight on a1 cannot easily escape. Has only two squares to go legally. b3 will be taken by the pawn on a2, and c2 will be taken. Will be attacked twice by the knight on a3 and the queen on d1, and protected only once by the pawn, by the bishop on f5. If the black knight moves, it's lost. But is it going to be attacked? It seems that if the bishop from c1 goes anywhere, then the next move, queen takes the knight. But let's see what's going to happen. Black moves the pawn to h6, so the bishop, either way rather, could not go to g5. The other bishop goes to g2, on the diagonal. The white attacks a black bishop that goes back to h7. The other pawn goes to f4, and this is a blunder. The black pawn goes to b5, ready to attack, but forgets that the knight on c6 now is hanging. The bishop from g2 can take the knight on h6, check, and then win the rook on a8. Yes, the bishop will be taken back, but still white has won a rook like that, and that's why computer says they have an advantage of 1.8. Suddenly, from 3.2 for black, it becomes 1.8 for white, but of course only if they play correctly, which they don't. Pawn goes to b4, black is back again. And black does not defend, pawn goes to a5. White does not take the knight, takes the pawn. Black takes the pawn and forgets about the knight. And white attacks the other knight on a1. You may wonder what's the difference with knight attack. If they took the knight on c6, it's with a check. So after black responds, they could also have taken the other knight and really be ahead. And black defends, the knight sending to c2 is not even defend, it's going to be taken. But how? Ideally, white should first take the knight on c2 and then take the knight with a check and then take the knight on c2. But will this happen? Nope. White only thinks about the knight on c2 and forgets the other prize, the other knight on c6. And black will send the rook on a2. attacking the bishop on b2. What will white do? Finally, how many attempts? White, so on the fifth opportunity, white missed it 4 times, black missed it 4 times, and they took the knight on c6. And now white is ahead by 0.5, not too much. And they check. How will black respond? They can only put the king to e7 or f8. Of course, legally they could put the queen to d7, but they're not going to lose the queen like that. King goes to f8. Black cannot castle any longer. White defends the bishop by sending the queen to c1. Bishop goes to h4 check for black. King to g2. Once again, the game is almost even. White has a small advantage of 1.0. Pawn goes to g5 for black. Open the space. And white pawn goes to f5. This is a blunder. When you see a red circle with two question marks, that is a blunder. White will take the one pawn back. Excuse me, black takes the white pawn, yes, and white is going to check with the bishop on a3. King goes to g7. Queen goes to b1 and attacks the rook on a2. Let's see how black will respond. They take the piece on a3. They take the bishop on a3, which is a blunder because they're going to lose their rook to the knight. Once again, the difference is quite small, 0.9 for black. The game is more or less even. Queen goes to d6. The computer doesn't like it. The black's advantage becomes very small, 0.2. Indeed suggests the game restarted now. Bishop takes the pawn on b5. Which the computer thinks it's a blunder for white. Why? Let's see. In fact, now black is ahead by 4.4. Black took the knight on a3. Is ahead by 3.6. Not the best move. Pawn, white takes a pawn, and black checks from a8. There is a diagonal steward, but the rook on h1 is protected both by the king on g2 and the queen on b1. King goes to g1. Queen goes to 3. It's a very good position. In fact, it's one move away from mate. If black would move again, queen would go to f2 and checkmate. Let's see how will white reply to that. Will white even see it? Yes, they saw it. Queen goes to f1. Queens are exchanged. And bishop for black goes to f5. And at this moment, you see the red circle with the white flag. White resigned. According to the computer, black is ahead by 4.3. But material-wise, black is up by only +2, meaning both sides have a rook and 2 light pieces. Black has 4 and white has 2. Perhaps a little bit early resignation, but black resigned. White resigned and black won the game, and my skin won both of the games, and my skin advances to the final round. But let's see now, what does the computer think about the entire game? Let's check now the next screen. Want now to have the entire screen. And here we are. Here we're going to see what the computer thought about the game. 57.3 percentage accuracy for white, 63.2 for black. Game rating, quite low. White played as if their rating was 550, which is really very low. And even though they started with 954, this is even lower than that. Well, black had only 700, less than half of the actual rating. Let's see the various categories. No brilliant moves, 3 great moves for black, best 10 for white, 9 for black, excellent 6 for black, 3 for white, good 7 for white, 2 for black, 3 book moves each of them. Inaccuracies. 4 for black, 1 for white, mistakes 2 for white, 0 for black. Misses 5 for white, and I think most of them had to do with not taking the knight on c6 when they had a chance, and 1 for black. Finally, blunders 2 for white and 5 for black. Hence, this concludes Group 4. We're going to see now what's happening to the various groups. Group 1 is still going on. Maxim Govoruka started with 2 wins in 2 games, but for the time being, everyone is in the game. Group 2, with Andrea Mart closing the account after winning Boris Alexandrovich Peasants, make it almost impossible for Boris to advance, and it's going to be decided between Barracks and MGC 89. Group 3, where I'm participating, UV 1415 has started with 5 timeouts and is ready for 6-1. So it's going to be decided among the remaining 3 of us, myself, Tahari, Delane, and Abu Taleb. And Group 4, my skin guaranteed advancing the final round. That concludes today's coverage. Thanks for watching. Thanks to the viewers, to the subscribers. If you haven't yet subscribed, all you need to do is click the subscribe button. Thanks to the ones of you that have left some nice comments. We'll continue with more games as they conclude. I'm Harilos Aniziris. This is my grecochess YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.